Where were we? Ah, yes, we were molting. That's what was happening. We were molting, as I distinctly recall. Now look at this cicada. Is that creepy? I think it's purdy. I don't know. I mean, that's purdy. Another thing about arthropods that's very special, they metamorphosize. They metamorphosize. In other words, they change form. I mean, not just kind of little, but I mean a lot, like a hugely change form. If you think about it, well, you kind of know this. Oh, sure, you knew this. Well, look at this example. Mm-hmm. So at the bottom there in the picture, you see these wormy things, and at the top you see this flying thing, and this is the same animal. What animal is this? All right, well, it would be hard to believe that this is the same animal, except you already knew about this. Okay, that's why it's not too hard to believe. At the bottom, you have a picture of some silk worms, as they call them, and at the top, you have a silk moth. Lovely silk moth there. So it changed drastically in form. That's what metamorphosis is. But let's not forget there's another form in between, another form, and a delicious one at that. Bundigi. Aha. So what do you call that? Well, I'm not sure what even to call bundigi, except, well, do I call that a silkworm pupa or do I call it a silk moth pupa? Well, I'm going to call it a silk moth pupa, I guess. That's what you call that. So here then are the words for these things. So you saw the larva, those wormy things, and you saw the adult with the lovely wings, and in between the pupa, this pupal stage, the pupa that's in between is the stage that, well, it can't even do anything. It just kind of holds still. You know, I think of a bundigi. What does a bundigi even do? Nothing. It's this transitional form that's actually different from the larva and different from the adult. So you have three distinct forms that are awfully drastically different. So this is complete metamorphosis that you'll see in many kinds of arthropods, but some arthropods, well, they don't do all that. Some of them, well, there's not really an in-between stage for one thing, and for another, well, some of them, that larva stage is not really that different from the adult stage. Sometimes they call it kind of incomplete metamorphosis. Well, okay, the form changes, but not that much really. So, well, they're kind of the same as the adult, but just a lot smaller. Well, maybe probably softer. You know, adults tend to be hard if they're arthropods or something. Tender little, cute little devils. Ah, and they're probably a different color too. They probably totally change color. And if you get down to the details, you'll probably find that there are a lot of little things different, really. I mean, a lot more different than, well, the average, say, the average person growing up. Let's call that then the nymph. The nymph is the word for that if the baby form and the adult form are not that much different, really. So I suppose you could call a baby person kind of a nymph, I guess. But, well, arthropods change a little more than that from out of childhood. Well, let's take an example with a picture here. So there you go. I mean, look at those cute little baby grasshoppers. Yeah. Yep, so cute. And they grow up to be so delicious. Mm, yeah. So that is the nymph and the adult. And some of them, they don't metamorphosize that much, really. Um, well, there's one more thing that I want to say about arthropods, then to explain what they are and, well, what they're not. Now, here, this is a drawing of sort of the basic form of an arthropod. Um, but you'll find that there's something missing on the inside uh, from the point of view of a vertebrate, anyway. There's something that they lack. So here's especially if you consider that well, animals generally, what does animal even mean? Let's just think of this, animal. Well, that actually comes from not something like animation, movement. That's not originally where the word comes from. The word originally comes from the idea of breathing, to breathe. That's actually what that meant, first of all. So, well, animals, they breathe. There are some very few, very rare exceptions, but they breathe. In other words, they need oxygen. They need that oxygen in order to live. That's an animal thing. And well, that's true of the animals in the ocean too. They breathe the oxygen that's in the water. Well, so here on land, well, what do you have a lot of on land? Arthropods and vertebrates. Well, so we breathe oxygen out of the air. But arthropods have no lungs. They are lungless. So how do they, I mean, no lungs, how do they breathe air? How do they breathe the oxygen out of the air without lungs? Well, that's actually kind of a complicated question, but for the most part, well, they just are able to let air flow through them. And for this reason, they don't get very big. So this is a big limiting factor for arthropods. You can only get so big because if you get too big, then the air can't just flow into the middle that far. So it becomes a problem. So that's what keeps them small. But, well, think of a cicada. That's not a very small animal as animals go. So they can get pretty big. And historically, there was a time when there was more oxygen in the air a long time ago in the Carboniferous period, about 1/3 of a billion years ago. In those early days, there was more oxygen in the air. So an arthropod could get bigger and still breathe air well enough just by the flow of air. There were dragonflies back then that they had wings this big across. Well, so these days there's not that much oxygen in the air. It's only about 20%. They think it was probably almost twice that concentration, like 40 or something. They don't know. They're just guessing, really. But that's what limits the size of an arthropod. Yeah.